What's up, everyone, and welcome to PLHB Radio. Play Hard and Love Big Radio is the official podcast of Spotted Dog Yoga and Sup, based out of Folsom, California. Play Hard and Love Big Radio is dedicated to bringing you the inspirational people and the inspirational stories to help you connect to your center so that you can go out and live your most purposeful and passionate life. And I'm so excited today, right now, to have my good friend Dan Nevins on the show with us. Dan Nevins and I connected through the Baptiste yoga community, and Dan is a warrior, speaker, and a teacher. Welcome to the show, buddy.
Thanks, brother. So good to be here. Appreciate you having me on, and also just get a chance to catch up, man. It's been a little too long, not like crazy long, but a little too long. So I'm excited to see what's happening.
Same here, man. Actually, the last time that we hung out in the flesh was in San Francisco for the Veterans Yoga Teacher Training. You remember that?
I do. Yep, absolutely. The Unbreakable training that we did.
You and I were staying at Sean's place, and we were both in the treehouse. We were roommates that weekend.
That's it, man. That treehouse is legit, though. If they could just add a bathroom, peeing off the balcony into, I mean, there's something kind of primal about that too. It's kind of nice, but
gets a little weird when you start pooping off the balcony.
Yeah, right.
But
I mean, weird is relative, right?
Yeah, I mean, weird is relative. Well, hey, y'all, I want to tell you one quick story about Dan, and then I'm going to give him the reins and let him share his story, and we'll move through the podcast. But when Spotted Dog Yoga and Sup opened 10 years ago, Dan Nevins was one of our first guest speakers and teachers, and Dan came to town and put on a show. I remember people talking about that for years, and people still talk about you when you came in and how you inspired and changed their lives. Personally, from Katie and I's perspective, it was the energetic bolt that got Spotted Dog Yoga off of the ground. And I remember the evening after Dan's sessions, we went downtown, historic Folsom, and we had dinner at Chicago Fire and kicking back, having a great time and whatnot. And I remember asking you, Dan, I said, hey, Dan, how much money do I need to write you for this check for you coming out here? You flew all the way out here. You put on these sessions all weekend long. You're like, let me think about it, So a couple weeks later, I reach out. I'm like, Dan, how much do I owe you, man? I'm going to write you a check. And he said, you know what? Just think of this as a wedding present for you and Katie. And, man, that was really... It brings up some emotion right up from the start, man. It was one of the neatest things you could have done and did. And not only did you make a huge difference for all the people that you touched that weekend, but that made a huge difference for us in our lives. And we believe that a huge part of our success at Spotted Dog Yoga is because of everything you've done for us all the way through. So I just want to say thank you, man.
Oh, man, it is, it's an honor and privilege. I think that's what, I don't know if I have the sort of authority to say. I think that's what the world is missing. It's just people being good to each other, right? Not being like, if you can be good to someone without being bad to yourself, then that's what I think. That's what we should do. As human beings on this earth. I mean, the world is, man, it's crazy out there. I don't watch the news, but if you were to watch the news, I get enough from like my little channels that I sort of observe the world from. If you look around, everybody's talking about how different we are and et cetera, picking sides, all this. And I'm like, man, if we just stopped to realize how much we're so much more the same as each other than we are different. And if we just found a way to treat people in the way that we would like to be treated in a certain situation, man, then the world would probably be pretty awesome. I mean, it's still awesome, but the awesome side is struggling, with all this sort of negativity happening in the world. So it is cool to be able to share space. Even we go back 10 years, right? To share, a little longer than that, but to share space and just have a chance to be together and bring some East Coast love out there to the West Coast.
Yeah, we need some of that, man. Some of that intensity that you got out there in the East Coast. Although I think Florida is probably a little bit different, a little less intense than the far East Coast, right?
Yeah, it is. We have a little bit of everything. I call it, when I'm in New York a lot, and I'll say, I'm in Florida. I mean, South New York, right? Because like everybody comes down eventually, right? It's pretty hard to find a native Floridian. I mean, they're here, obviously, but there's a lot of people who are just from somewhere else. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sure it's like that in California as well. Yes. Probably everywhere at this point.
Yeah, similar everywhere it seems like, but Florida for sure, escaping the winter time to get down there and warm up a little bit.
It's it. Snowbirds, as they call it.
The snowbirds, that's right. Speaking of that, I told you already, but I want to let the guests know that I wore this shirt today, this red shirt, because, well, it makes me feel like it's Christmas that I have you on this podcast, dude.
It's like actually like 68 degrees outside here in Florida. And so that's good. Like that is goodness, because it was kind of cooking the summer. So
yeah, kind of like a little bit of fall weather for you. I know your request was that I wore a sparkly Speedo and a tank top and a biker hat, right?
I forgot. Mine was, I was going to wear mine, but it's still in the laundry. Because I got it messed up last night.
Well, it's one of those things I think was kind of funny about like in 2020 when everybody started getting into Zoom, and still now, is you just never know if somebody has pants on.
True. You don't know. I'm not going to show you.
Yeah. I don't want to know. Yeah. Keep it above the chest there, dude, right, or whatever.
Keep it up here.
Above the belly, man, for sure. Oh my goodness. So it sounds like you're into some serious golfing, huh?
Yeah. Like I used to play a lot and used to be pretty good. Especially for a guy with no legs. But, life, travel, work kind of happens, and then you play less and less and less and less. But one of the things I realized while I was convalesced over the last year and a half was, man, I got to move my body in a way that feels really good, And there was a good while, like even for a while, even after I got all this, I had stage 3 colon cancer and a surgery that failed, and I was flat on my back for months and months, and like exposed organs, just bad, just bad. And then so when I was finally able to get up and get moving, like yoga was a little out of the question, just because I was still very sensitive in my abdominal area. Like upward facing dog took a while to even think about doing. But like I could twist and run. It's like, I got to get back out on the golf course. And like that has been, it's been a little bit of a lifesaver, like a life raft, if you will. It's like I kind of threw myself that opportunity to like say, I'm like, maybe I can still do it. And I still had a little game left. So it was good to not be super terrible like I thought I was going to be.
Yeah.
And then realize like, I can still do it.
Kind of like riding a bike, maybe?
Yeah, a little bit.
Like that whole saying, like if you've done it before, you can do it again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like riding a bike, but the bike has like 6 wheels that are in different angles and the one pedal's missing, and right. You can still do it.
Totally, man. Well, hey, let's talk about your background for some of the listeners who don't know who you are. You grew up in Baltimore. Is that correct?
I did. Yeah.
What was that like growing up in Baltimore? What was your childhood like?
So, man, it was, I talk about it sometimes. I'm like, have you ever seen The Wire, the show? And like, the drug gangs and the crooked cops and that whole kind of deal. I was like The Wire adjacent. So I was just right over the city line in Baltimore County. But that's where, the Baltimore County didn't have like anti-gang units, anti-drug units, task force, SWAT teams. So like a lot of that criminal activity was in Baltimore County because they just were able to get away with it a little easier and just go right across the city line, which was like a 5-minute walk, Mm-hmm. So it was it could be worse, but it was rough. A lot of violence, like even walking to school, I'd have to dodge the little drug lieutenants hanging out like on the corners. And I was just, I was always a little kid, even when I thought I was big, I was still little. And then I just get messed with all the time. It's tough to say bullied because I don't think bullied's the right word. Like threatened, and it was probably like looking back now, they were probably just messing with me. But when you're a kid and you have this grown man showing you his gun and like threatening you, you really don't think it's a joke. or you don't, you're pretty uncertain about if you're going to get out of that situation. Okay. So it was like that sort of picture. And my mom left when I was a kid to like 13. So, and my dad was a truck driver. He was gone all the time. So my brother and I kind of raised ourselves. And that's one of the reasons I joined the Army was like, I need to escape. Like I need to, like how, like I always knew I'm like, I got to do something different. Like I'd look around my landscape and I'd see people that were like, grades ahead of me, and they're like still living in their parents' house, or you're dealing like low level drug dealers. And I'm like, man, that's not what I want. And then so it's weird, but it's fortunate that the Gulf War, so like 1990, 91, the Gulf War started, and then, all the American flags came back out, and that sort of renewed sense of patriotism, even though it wasn't our country that was being invaded. It was like we were standing up for that classic bully scenario. I mean, who knows the actual truth of like what was really happening geopolitically, but the narrative was, like this, this renewed sense of patriotism, and we were going to go and, support our way of life overseas, so it, wouldn't happen at home. And so like that was sort of the impetus to be like, okay, this is the military, something I should do, because not only do I get to like serve my country and sort of stand up for that whole bully situation and take up arms, like actually have a fair fight in that situation, which was, like, as a kid, all those almost fights and threatening, like they weren't very fair. Little retribution, weirdly enough. And I got to leave. I got to like escape. And so that was cool. It was like a way out that became a whole, I guess, part of who I am now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And what was your experience in serving? Like, how did it go? How long were you in Iraq? And then how does it transform from there?
Yeah, it's crazy because I joined initially like, okay, I'm going to do 4 years, and I'm going to do the GI Bill and the college fund, get money for college. I'll be the first person in my family to go to college. Like, I was like so excited. And then, so I did. I joined initially for 4 years. My first duty station was in Germany, so that was actually really cool because I got to be the poor kid from Baltimore. We grew up really poor, so like now I'm like in Europe, and I could just hop on a train and go to Florence or Paris, or I got to travel all over Europe and like see all the things that I saw like in my history books in grade school, And it was like, it was eye-opening. It made me just, culturally open my eyes. I learned how to speak German while I was stationed over there, and met really great German friends who I'm still friends with today.
Wow. But
then I did the thing, I can't say unfortunately, because I have an amazing daughter out of it, and who's 29. I can't believe I have a 29-year-old daughter. I'm like, wow. How is she older than me? Doesn't make any sense. But,
how'd you pull that off?
Weird. But, I got married very young to a woman I should not have gotten involved with. So I wound up, she literally went sideways in her life, and I raised our daughter together. So I was basically a single dad. And so then at that time, like I'm getting out of the Army, I'm basically a single dad. I'm like, what am I going to do? So I re-enlisted, did 4 more years to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, because I was a paratrooper. So when I went to Germany, I was like, there's no airborne units in Germany. So I learned how to jump out of airplanes and wear the maroon beret and be all like cool, but I didn't get to do it. So I re-enlisted to have that opportunity to do that. And Fort Bragg, North Carolina is the best place in the world to be in the Army. I mean, I believe. You have special operations there. You have, 82nd Airborne Division. I was in headquarters of 18th Airborne Corps. So, it's a 4-hour recall to anywhere in the world. That's sort of like, beat your chest and be like, if anything happens, I'm going to be the one that's going, like that sort of macho, masculine vibe.
Yeah.
But I absolutely loved it. But it was peacetime Army, and I was successful. But I was like, time to turn the page, got out, and then simultaneously re-enlisted into the National Guard, first in Maryland, right? Because I was going to go home, because I was like, I get to go home. Because when you're gone for 8 years, you start to get homesick. At least I think most people do, but I certainly did. And then I got home. I was enrolled in at the University of Maryland. I had to wait to start the fall semester. And I just started looking around, and all my friends were living in their parents' basements, low-level drug dealers, like that whole, and I was like, sort of the same thing I escaped. If I, for some reason, thought it was going to be different, but it wasn't. Yeah. So I just packed up all my stuff and moved to California, but NorCal, so up in Sonoma County. Mm-hmm. And so I went to school at Sonoma State, graduated, but that whole time, studied business there, loved it. It was a great vibe. Got remarried to like a much better version of a wife. We're not together anymore. So now I'm on number 3.
Third time's the charm. That's right. And your new wife's, her name is Kaylin. Is that correct?
Kaylin, that's right. Yeah. And she's absolutely incredible.
Yeah. Congratulations, man.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. And so I stayed in the National Guard that whole time, right? So 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year. I was in the Guard when 9/11 happened. And then so there was a sort of scare that we might be called up. I actually went to some stateside deployment, which wasn't that called Operation Noble Eagle. It was just an inconvenience to be pulled out of school for 6 months. So then it delayed my graduation from college, but then I went back, graduated, and then a year later was deployed. And now I'm a pharmaceutical sales rep working for Pfizer. Like, just built a house on a vineyard. Like, there was a Cabernet vineyard as far as you can see from my bed. I mean, it was somebody else's Cabernet vineyard, but it felt like it was mine, right? Like I could see it all, but my little fence was there, and then a Cabernet vineyard as far as you could see. I felt like I made it, and the poor kid from Baltimore, done good, paid his dues, went to school, first person in his family to graduate college, like that whole like life is going well, and then boom, deployed to Iraq. And supposed to be for 6 months, turned out it was 18 months. But I only did a year of that deployment because on November 10th of 2004, I was severely, catastrophically wounded by an improvised explosive device that detonated beneath my vehicle as we were headed out for a 72-hour dismounted counterinsurgent operation. So the idea was we were going to drive out to where the bad guys were supposed to be, kind of hop out of the trucks, do our little dismount, sneaky patrol to, handle business, come home. That was the idea. But we were headed out. I mean, not even a kilometer outside of LSA Anaconda where we're stationed. Pitch black outside, eerily silent. I just remember, when we left the main gates of LSA Anaconda, it was exactly 0400 hours, like right on time. And to being deployed, it's worth mentioning, being deployed from the California National Guard. I'm not trying to disparage the National Guard or California or the California Guard at all, but like we were not ready. Mm-hmm. Like, looking at the training records for my battalion, you'd realize that, people hadn't shot their weapon in more than 6 years. And people hadn't done a physical fitness test in longer than that. Like it was like we were not this epitome of readiness as like you'd imagine, right? Which it is now because we learned hard lessons in the sort of the introduction to the global war on terror.
Yeah.
So it was a steep learning curve. So when we got in the theater, we didn't think we were going to do anything significant, but somehow we wound up on my whole company of combat engineers. I was in the combat engineer company. We wound up in this infantry task force called Task Force Tacoma. So they reorganized our whole company. So it was our company of combat engineers. Now they wave their magic wand, we're infantry. A company of Abrams tanks, and then a platoon of scouts. And so they made us this task force, and we were assigned to or attached to 1st Infantry Division. And so it was our job to act on operational intelligence. So like here we were, like I affectionately called us the Beverly Hillbillies because I remember distinctly we're in Kuwait, we're about to like roll through Baghdad and then up MSR Tampa, which was like the Devil's Highway, the Death Highway. It was all these like, you're going to get attacked. It's like going to happen. There was all these like inevitables of like, oh, if you're on MSR Tampa, you're going to get hit. But we had to go through MSR Tampa to get to Balad Air Base, aka LSA Anaconda, which where we were going to be. And I just remember we're rolling out, so there's that tension in the air, right? Like you're going to get in a firefight. You are going to get attacked. Okay, it's going to happen. And so like I'm stacking grenades in my vest, and I'm just looking around, and we're wearing desert camouflage uniforms, but woodland camouflage vests, with our sappy plates, the sort of bulletproof plates, and our helmets. Some of them didn't even have helmet covers, but it's like wood. Like we're all mismatched. Our weapons were literally, like, not kidding, from the Vietnam era.
Oh, wow.
Like, so we have these like antiquated weapons that hadn't been shot in years and years. And I'm like, we're it. Like, I heard banjos playing. Like it was like, here we go. And our vehicles were like woodland green, not even camouflage, because they'd been worked on so much and so many different hodgepodge pieces. And we had no roofs. We had like plywood as our roof with like duct tape, which we called 100-mile-an-hour tape, and like paracord tying down pieces of plywood. And like, since we're in National Guard, we had a lot of different like civilian job sets that were, in our group. And so we had welders that were like welding pieces of steel where we didn't have doors. Like it was like literally like, I'm like, I can't believe, we're the most professional army in the world, but like, this is what we're rolling with. And what was extra funny was, I know it's making the story longer than it has to be, but what was extra funny was, so we're in Kuwait, so we're leaving, and protecting these gates of Kuwait, which is like relatively, there's nothing happening in Kuwait. Like it wasn't dangerous. Were active duty Marines and active duty Army guys with like the best gear possible. Like they have all the right stuff. Everything's matching. They have the latest and greatest of everything. And they're staying where it's peaceful and nothing's happening. And we're going into like imminent danger, allegedly, and we have like the hoopties. We got the leftovers of like the Army refurbished depot, right? Like, yeah. And then here we go.
Interesting.
Yeah, crazy. But we got into theater and got assigned to that task force and learned some really tough lessons. We started losing people, and then as a result of losing really good men. Like I say men not to be exclusive of women, but we didn't have women at all. We were a combat arms infantry company. It's a little different today, but back then, just all guys.
All guys.
And we started losing these great men, and there's something really powerful about goals. If you're in business, you know about goals. I know you yourself and your wife, you know about goals and like what it takes to, achieve a goal, and then what the consequence of not achieving your goal means for your life. Mm-hmm. And in this situation, the consequence of not meeting your goal, and our goal was to at least rise to, it would be wrong of me to say rise to mediocrity, but we were less than mediocre to begin with, right? But rise to be effective. Like, can we be an effective combat unit, like door kickers? And like, can we elevate? Because we had some, weight issues for some of our folks and untrained. But here's what I'm really trying to say is when the consequence of not meeting your goal, at least to be an effective combat unit, when that consequence of not meeting that goal is that your best friends die. The amount of human transformation potential in those moments are awe-inspiring. And so I got to be witness as a leader, to be witness to this incredible human transformation, to watch people who were terrified, untrained, not ready, fill in the blank of like any, like, talk about, negative self-talk, like we're not ready, like that whole, it was an attitude, but that got better. And then we got better and we got to be really good. And that's powerful. But anyway,
What did
Yeah,
it
go
take
ahead.
for you as a leader to get people to the point where they were letting go of their negative self-talk and they were stepping into their role in a more powerful way?
That's a really great question. And the answer to that is I had to stop it for myself.
Got it.
You know, I guess I'll share this story too. It's one I'm not proud of, but it's real, right? When we first got into theater, like we didn't know what we were going to do. Like we're going to be at Ellis Anaconda. Oh, then what's going to happen? We're reorganized as infantry, but like, what are we really going to do? This is before we got assigned to this task force, and we were going to do like gate guard, like be on the entry control point, like the front gates, and then in the towers, like watching over the base. And I was like, oh, that's really the pushing the extent of what we're going to do. And then turns around, we're getting assigned to this task force, and then we're going to be kicking in doors and chasing down bad guys. And I was terrified. I was like, not with these people, not with the Beverly Hillbillies, And it was not coming from a good place because I wasn't too far separated from active duty. I still had friends that were still in at Fort Bragg and 18th Airborne Corps and 82nd. And so I literally went to the internet cafe. This is before you can use a phone. Like it was basically the Stone Ages. And I emailed like everybody I still knew on active duty. Hey, I wasn't trying to leave combat or leave my deployment. I was trying to leave my unit.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, do you have anything open? Are you downrange? Can you get me assigned back to like you people I trust? And fortunately, all those emails went unanswered and we just got thrown into the fire. And I've never been so blessed to have been in the position that I was because I had to learn those hard lessons myself. That, God put me there for a reason. Like this is what's happening. And to say make the best of it sounds cliche, but this is what's happening. And if I'm going to do it, like we're going to go all in. And then so when I realized that I had to get out of that mindset of I'm scared and I don't want to be here and realizing like this is where we are and we better be good at it. Then from that place, once I got settled there, then I could be the example for people and speak real about it.
Yeah. That's amazing. I feel like people in everyday life do that. They look for ways to take themselves out as opposed to just allowing themselves to be where they are. Mm-hmm. And then, by the grace of God in some way, shape, or form, we end up being where we're supposed to be. And
exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So then what happens next?
So headed out for this mission, like again, not even a kilometer outside the base. And then boom, the silence of that pre-dawn was destroyed by the deafening blast that sent my 18,000-pound up-armored vehicle. By this time, we're in better vehicles. Like we have got better weapons, better vehicles. Like we're actually more prepared. Like we're in the fight.
You're in the mindset, more of in a mindset as a group.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yeah, we were like ready. Like we were ready. We were so ready to go do this.
Yeah.
Because it was one of those, to give it some texture for people that might not understand. There's a lot of especially where we were in Balad, it's kind of rural. It's right on the Tigris River. And so there's it's kind of a lush landscape, giant date palms, pomegranate orchards, orange groves, grape vineyards. It's beautiful, actually. Wow. It's not very deserty, which a lot of people kind of feel that it might be. But typically most of the missions you're getting is like, okay, you're going to do a patrol, or you're going to go meet with the local leaders and we'll give candy and soccer balls to the kids, like sort of that, what they called hearts and minds. But it was great because you got to interact with locals and they'd tell you where the bad guys were. And then, most of the sort of lion's share of the time, it was like, you're just kind of being present and observing for danger, but there's not a lot to do. And then you get an IED attack or maybe a small pop-on ambush and you'd handle business or lose some people. It's hard to say that. It's hard that I can say that so nonchalantly, but that's just reality of it. And but most of the time it's just sort of, you're on hyper alert, but you're just kind of going through this routine situation. So when the operations came that were like, no, you're going to have an engagement. Like, the threat level is ultra high. We totally expect you to be engaged. We expect to engage the enemy, and we expect them to be ready for us, right? So those are like really high pressure situations. And this was one of those. But we were ready, prepared. I was leading this particular operation. My boss, my platoon sergeant, I was the first squad leader of 3rd Platoon. My platoon sergeant should have been leading it, but he was having hernia surgery that same day. And he wound up driving the vehicle that I was in, because he was the type that he couldn't just let his men go in harm's way without him being there as long as he could. And so he volunteered to drive and drove my vehicle, the lead vehicle, in a 6-vehicle convoy headed out to where we were going to get dropped off. And then again, the idea to go sneak through the bushes, for lack of a better word, to go find the bad guys. And when we hit that IED, it was 255 millimeter artillery shells that blew up right underneath my feet, and I'm sitting behind the driver. So though that explosion and the corresponding shrapnel from those 155 millimeter artillery shells shredded Mike into pieces, who was driving, and then my legs. And I remember, when the explosion happened, my head was bowed in prayer like it was before every mission. And when, boom, I just remember not so much a loud noise, but like my ears were ringing and I could hear the truck basically disintegrate around my body. Like, it sounded like shaking bolts in a jar almost. And I might have been knocked out for a second or two, I'm not sure. But when I opened my eyes, I realized that I was ejected from the truck and I'm laying in the dirt. The doors are blown off. And my legs are stuck in the, I couldn't get them out. So I just remember this dust was flowing. I could see a little more now because it was pitch black, but there was some fire from the blast that was sort of little. I want to be clear here. It wasn't this big giant fire. There were little pieces of fire from like all the oil and transmission fluid that was blown out of the engine. And those little pockets were catching on fire in my vehicle. So I could see some now with the light from the fire, and the dust was descending, and I saw my weapon stuck in the door frame of the vehicle. And I just remember saying to myself, Dan, get up, put your weapon into operation. Dan, get up, put your weapon into operation. And I couldn't move. I still don't know why, like physically I couldn't move at all. And then I looked, I guess I could move my head because I remember turning my head, and then I saw Mike. And it was painfully obvious that he was no longer with us and made the ultimate sacrifice. And then I was like realizing that I was probably hurt pretty bad, like more than I knew. And I just remember like pausing for a minute and listening, and I just heard my team moving, securing the perimeter, doing everything they're supposed to be doing. And I'm supposed to be the guy yelling out commands for them to do everything that they were doing, but I was saying nothing, but they're still doing everything right. And I was just like, I caught my breath for a second. I was like, okay, I better check myself out. And I grabbed my helmet, and it came apart in 2 pieces in my hand. And I was like, shit, right? But I'm like, I'm conscious, right? So that's good. Like, my head wasn't hurting at that moment. And we're trained to start with our head and then go down to see if you're bleeding, all this stuff. And I just remember my hands were stinging, but I could, I had a taste of blood in my mouth. My face was really hot. My face just felt really hot. My ears were still ringing. I had that taste of blood in my mouth, and I'm doing all this and I'm checking myself. And there's a little bit of light, but it's still dark, right? So make no mistake about it. It's still, you're very confused and disoriented. At least I was, just being blown up like that. And I remember I reached up for my legs, and my legs are still attached, but they're stuck in the vehicle because the undercarriage of the truck had like exploded upwards and pinned my legs in, like peeling back a tin can and smashing something in it. And I reached up for my legs, and I felt the unmistakable arterial blood spurt with every beat of my heart. And I knew I was going to die. I was saying goodbye to my wife. my 10-year-old daughter was giving up and losing what seemed like all of my blood in this miserable place on the planet. And then I just, how they say, when you're about to die, your life flashes before your eyes. That wasn't really my experience. It was more like a slideshow of things like left undone. Maybe call them like unrealized goals. I don't know. And I remember the quality of it, but I don't remember the images specifically. But I do remember the last image. And it was my 10-year-old daughter, but all grown up, dressed in white head to toe, and walking down the aisle without her dad. And I shot up. Like it was I shot up, and I was like, I'm alive. And I better like do something to keep it that way. And I just reached my hand in the wound in my thigh. Like some of the shrapnel from the blast had torn through my thigh, like all the way to my femur, and actually punched a big hole out of the roof of the Humvee, the 1/2-inch steel roof of this Humvee.
Damn. And
I just pressed against the piece of shrapnel that was still lodged in my femur. Like some of it stayed behind. I just remember feeling it was hot and goopy. Like I thought I was going to be like MacGyver and like, God, just grab the artery, pinch it off. Like I'm good, I got it. Like, but it just wasn't like that. I just pressed and prayed that it would give enough time for a medic to arrive. And like I was kind of fading in and out. It's like I blinked my eyes and there was my medic, this guy named Dan Smee. He just looked at me in the face and lying to me, saying, Sergeant Nevins, you're going to be all right. Well, he was screaming it, Sergeant Nevins, you're going to be all right. And I blinked again. There was a tourniquet on my leg. Blinked again. One of my team leaders was putting an IV in my arm to get my blood pressure back up because I lost probably, most of my blood. And then my whole team was there, putting themselves in harm's way to remove my legs from that vehicle that was still on fire. And then on a helicopter back to the combat surgical hospital, which was right next to the main gates of LSA and the condo that I just left maybe 10 minutes before. And then so thankfully for that proximity and the blood bank that they had there, they were able to get my blood pressure back up and do the whole thing and surgery. And I woke up and there was a combat nurse's face right in mine. She just didn't want me to look down. And she said, Sergeant Nevins, you're a very lucky man. We managed to repair your femoral artery. We had to take your left leg below the knee, managed to save your right one for now, but you'll probably lose that one too. She was right. And man, I was like instantly in the hole. Like, what can a guy with no legs do? How's my wife going to love me? I just took myself down that sort of pity party road. Yeah. And then I took a breath. And then I looked off to my left side. And then there was just I'm in a tent. So I say hospital, combat surgical hospital, it's a tent. Mm-hmm. And against the wall of the tent was just my whole team, my family, just waiting for me to wake up. I just remember they surrounded my bed. And we told horribly inappropriate jokes, which is like, I think what we do. It's sort of how we love each other in the Army. And I think it's kind of like dudes too. Like how we love each other is like, make fun of each other, from love, but there's no exception to that in the military. Yeah. And then told stories about Mike, who I wear this bracelet for every day. And I fell asleep and woke up at Longshore Regional Medical Center, bunch of surgeries there, ultimately at Walter Reed, where I spent 2 years and 30-some different surgeries. And then transitioning out and going back to the real world. Wow, man.
Hey, I've heard you tell this story quite a few times, and I know you tell it on the regular. How has it been healing for you to share your story?
Oh, man, it is. So there's a lot of psychological terms for this, like immersion therapy and whatever, but you have to tell your stories, especially if they're traumatic. Because it's profoundly impactful for me. Like I started telling my story way back when I was at Walter Reed to sort of help. Wounded Warrior Project was barely existing back then. And then so they were the ones in the hospital like getting things done and like actually making stuff happen. And they were the ones that helped me prove that my disability didn't define me, but like taking me out to go snowboarding and wakeboarding and, bringing my family, having like togetherness time, and realize, no, I can still do this without legs, like that whole thing. And so I started telling my story to help them fundraise, because I was, it's a whole nother story, but at Congressional Golf Club, it turns out you have to be like really wealthy to be a member there. We needed a golf tournament there, and it cost $4,000 to play in this golf tournament. It was a fundraiser for Wounded Warrior Project. And I thought that was a lot of money until I realized the net worth of the people that were there. And so at the end of that tournament, I said, can I just have the microphone? And I impromptu told my story for the first time, like everything that happened. Nick, tears, snot, like I struggled through it.
Yeah.
And then I asked, I was in sales, so I have no problem asking people for money. So after I was done with the snot and tears, I sort of like brought myself back into reality and said, and you mother effers, but I didn't say effer, should be ashamed of yourself. I thought $4,000 is a lot of money. It is for me, but it's not for you. And I know it. And so what I'm asking you to do, I'm not asking you to take food out of your family's mouth, but I'm asking you to write a check that hurts just a little, right? Just a little. And we raised like an extra $280,000 that day for the Warrior Project. And and I'm not saying this because it's actually good, but I just remember, because they had no real money back then. I just remember I'd go to another event and they're like, hey, Dan, you want to say anything? Right?
Yeah, they kind of like kept putting you in a place where you could share your story. Right. Really, yeah.
Yeah. And then so I started doing it. And the more I told my story, not only the more I remembered, right? And then but I got to like bring it all back out in front of me. And instead of it being stored as one of the most painful days of my life, excluding like watching one of my best friends like literally in pieces, and and like that whole image, and how jarring that is to think about. But I still see everything, but my relationship to it is completely transformed. Like now I don't see like death, destruction, like I'm not angry. I got to be like, wow, like I get to like, I can't change it. I mean, obviously I would if I could, but that's not a thing that we can do. So I was able to transform those emotions, and now I can see the picture, right? But I'm left with, man, how much admiration I had for Mike. What a great human being he was. And I still have a relationship with his children. Wow. Like I'm able to tell stories about Mike and like propagate his memory out into the world and like feel good about it. And then remember things, and then not only remember, but then, okay, so what is there to learn about it? So the more I get to share my story, one, from a place of sort of vulnerability, right? And not to sound cliche, like when you share from that place, it gives other people permission to share from that place. And so when you can share your story of like trauma and heartbreak, whatever that is, however the world was like against you, when you can share that story, then now other people feel comfortable sharing their story. And then you really get to know people too. And like that is, I think, what brings the world together. So not only did my relationship to that trauma transform, but then it's sort of like, as a storyteller, I get to share stories like that. Then other people get a little bit of courage to share their story. Mm-hmm. And then they can have that benefit of transforming their relationship to the pain. We focus a lot, especially in the military, on PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But truly, in my experience, at least with the community that I try to surround myself with, most of the people have been able to, through storytelling, through immersion therapy, through whatever means necessary, have actually transformed that into post-traumatic growth. I've learned so much more as a person. I'm so much more aware of this human experience for all people as a result of going through intense trauma. And so, I view it as a net positive for sure. And yeah, it sucks sometimes because I have to put prosthetic legs on and they get sore and, swollen and multiple surgeries. Like once you're an amputee, people might not know this, you're always having surgeries because things change and transform, and it's not perfect science the way prosthetics fit. So there's a lot of like ongoing stuff that could take you out, but then you're back in, So yeah, it's totally a net positive. Like in a weird way, I wouldn't trade it.
Yeah. It's like we should start using the PTG,
Yeah,
post traumatic
post-traumatic
growth.
Yeah.
I like that. No, I know being around you, I just who you are and the way that you share, I feel like I can just be myself. And even if I'm not sharing a story or some traumatic event per se, I am just like feel comfortable around you because I know that you're being vulnerable and real with me. And I've always felt that way around you, Like I know that's one of your qualities too, discernment. One of your best qualities, right? Like intuitively, I just get this, amazing feeling around you, man.
Thanks, brother.
And how amazing is that for Wounded Warriors? You're still doing work with them, right? It's almost been like 15 years you've been working with them.
Yeah, it's crazy. But 16 years. But okay, so since 2015, I stopped working for them directly, but I'm still involved. Like I still call myself a spokesperson.
Yeah.
I actually did. So Wounded Warrior Project is 20 years old now, and so I've been involved for 19.
Yeah.
Started working for them 16 years ago. And I had a bunch of big jobs and teams in the organization, and sort of feel like I got to contribute in some small way to the success of the organization, and to be able to serve more and more warriors and families. And but then I found yoga, and at like the time in my life that I needed it the most, and I was let me rephrase. I was leveraging my sort of status in the organization as a vice president and as a wounded warrior myself to be like, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to go teach yoga to all these different events of warriors. But meanwhile, I had a real job I was supposed to be doing. So it got to the point, and I was able to manage both. Like I was able to do both. But as the organization got more sophisticated, and they were like, they hired the Bobs. Do you know when I say the Bobs, that cultural reference from The Office?
Oh, no, I do
or
not
Office Space.
Okay.
Where they brought in the Bobs to like reorganize. But these Bobs were just there to like define roles and job descriptions, sort of put organization to this awesome nonprofit that grew up really quick.
Sure.
And it was starting to get to this critical mass, like, okay, we need to really get disciplined and structured. And then so I was telling the Bobs about how like, I teach yoga, I have these roles. And then it got to the point with like the chiefs and the CEO of like, hey, so we love that you're doing this yoga stuff. It's actually wildly beneficial, but like we need you to stay in this lane over here because that's the job description. And I was like, fuck you, I'm out. Like you can't tell me like that whole, not that I'm proud of behaving that way. So then we reached a compromise where I still got to do as a contractor the work that I was most passionate about, which was helping people share their stories and working with that community and doing those things. Obviously not the scale that I was, being compensated, but whatever, in a way that felt good. So then I could go do my own thing as a storyteller and teach yoga and keep the involvement and the best parts of my job.
Yeah. Oh man, that's awesome that you're able to have the both of best worlds, right?
Yeah, the both of best worlds.
You got the both of best worlds. I try to say things backwards all the time. Katie half the time doesn't understand what I'm saying,
It's
so
all right.
It's a good thing at least you're understanding me.
I got you.
Hey man, talk about yoga a little bit. Touch on how it's made a difference for you, how you still use it, and then and I also want to talk about your battle with cancer and how yoga helped you through that. But how has yoga made a difference for you in your life to the point where you want to share it the way that you do?
Yeah, it's well, I was, first of all, just to be clear, I was like, what's yoga? I'm not I had the growing up in the ghetto, then being in the army version of like yoga. Ooh, and then that's what women do, right? Like it's one of those, and women are amazing. They're actually my favorite version of humanity, are women. But I don't in any way identify, right? So it's one of those like, oh, it's not for me. So I've always been like that. Like people, oh, you want to do yoga? I'm like, no, it's weird that you're asking me, like that kind of thing. And then I got in a dark place with a surgery where I, typically all my surgery had to be around a bunch of warriors and doing all the things. But this one I had to take FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, from Wounded Warrior Project to go have a surgery. And so I went and had the surgery and came home. And now I was divorced. My oldest daughter just turned, she was almost 19, but had joined the Army herself. So she was out of the house. I had a 3-year-old that I shared with my ex-wife, but I couldn't take care of her because I was hopping around on one prosthetic leg and crutches, kind of dealing with this wound on the other leg and waiting for that to heal. I had 8 weeks to heal before I could put a leg back on, go back to work. And part of the FMLA is like, you can't talk to your team. And like my team at Wounded Warrior Project were my family. Like they were my friends. Like those were my people. And so I couldn't call them. I couldn't email them. I couldn't answer my email. I couldn't be a dad in a real way, an active way. And I was home alone. And I never dealt with the depressive side of trauma. I was fortunately able to always find the better way and take the higher road, and, like PTSD, like we were talking about, post-traumatic growth, like that, I was always able to do it. So I never had a situation where I was feeling the sort of negative effects until then. Because now I'm home alone. I can't talk to anybody. I used to self-medicate by like, go climb a mountain, go ride my mountain bike, go and I couldn't do any of those things. So I got really depressed really quick. And then I had nightmares, and the whole thing that like was supposed to be normal, but it wasn't normal for me. And then I was like drinking just to not feel. Then I was taking a handful of Benadryl and chasing it down with whiskey, and then hoping I wouldn't wake up. And I was like, all right, this is not good. And I didn't want to call Wounded Warrior Project because I was like, oh, they're going to overreact. And also my ego was involved as a leader too. I didn't want to look away. So I called a friend of mine, and unbeknownst to me, this friend of mine, who was more like an acquaintance, but for some reason, divine intervention, I felt like I'm going to call this girl I know. Unbeknownst to me, she had just done a bunch of yoga teacher trainings with some weird dude named Baron Baptiste.
Yeah, strange dude, that guy.
Right. But I didn't know that. And then so I'm telling her all these things are happening, telling her how I feel, and I'm more snot and tears. And she just listened. And then when I was done, she was like, Dan, you need some yoga in your life. I said, that's the dumbest fucking thing I've ever heard. I was so mad, Nick. I was like, no. And so she said, well, what about meditation? And I said, well, okay, that's more palatable. So she taught me how to sit, and I started meditating twice a day, and it was helpful. It wasn't like a miracle cure or anything, but it was helpful, especially connecting to breath. And then after I got better, I got my leg back, went back to work, and, life was good again. The light at the end of the tunnel, I came through it, and here I am. And I called her to say thank you. And then she's like, you owe me some yoga. And I was like, I couldn't get out of it. Agreed to 3 private lessons, and the first one sucked bad. The second one also sucked bad, and I was in pain and I was in agony. And I said, hey, can I just, I was so mad. I said, can I just do this with my legs off? Because I was wearing my prosthetics, doing all these things, and it was still sore from surgery too. And nobody got to see my legs off. Like my legs were like my best physical feature. When they got blown off, like I had to deal with that sort of body image shame. And then when I got the prosthetics, it covered it up. And then those were cool, right? Because, oh, wow, you can climb a mountain on prosthetics or ride a bike or do this. And kids always thought they were cool. Like that sort of masked my complete shame in what was left of my legs.
Got it.
But I just remember throwing my legs across the floor, and just figuring it out. And then I had this moment because I'm like, I'm going to do Warrior One. I'm going to figure it out on prosthetics. And poor Anna is probably just looking down at me. And I'm feeling smaller than ever in my whole life because here's this 5'2" yoga teacher in spandex and a ponytail towering over me because I'm on my knees on a mat. And she's looking at me from behind, probably now that I'm like taking myself back, wondering what the hell am I going to do? Tell this guy to do with his legs? Like, how am I going to figure this out as a yoga teacher to cue movement? And I just said, I'm going to do it myself. And she was saying, you know, these stupid things, Nick, like root down to rise up. Like, well, they're not stupid, but they felt stupid at the time. And I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it. So I just visualized roots growing out of my legs into the, like through my mat into the earth, like powerful visualization of like, and I almost felt it. And then in Warrior One, you know, you put your arms over your head. And when I did that, the earth, like not a metaphor, like the planet sent this jolt of energy up through my body that lit me up from the inside out. And my arms flew over my head and tears were streaming out of my eyes. And I never felt more powerful, more alive, more connected in my whole life. And I was on a yoga mat, and I was hooked. I was like, it was like the earth was saying, Dan, where have you been for the last 10 years? Floating above it on these prosthetic legs, like not even connected. And I realized that the basic lack of connection to our planet, that lack of connection was everywhere in my life. I used to say that my marriage was a casualty of the war. No, my marriage was a casualty of connection. All my relationships were very surface, and connection was missing everywhere. And I just went to work putting it back in. And then by my third private lesson, I signed up for my level 1 yoga teacher training. I remember my third practice with people in it was my first day of level 1. And it was a 4-hour practice in the bubble in Hawaii, in the freaking sweat bubble for my level 1. And I was like,
in Kalani.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
You got it. And then I was hooked. I was like, I want more and more and more and more. And yoga movement and connecting breath and movement has been, I think, my ultimate grounding tool. And breath, and ultimately meditation, right? So you talk about the limbs of yoga, the yamas, niyamas, asana, concentration. We're always getting the meditation, and meditation has really saved me so many times as a human being, as a parent, as a spouse, as a friend, as a human, and especially, when I found out I had cancer and I was going through the whys and the why me's, and then I had a surgery, and the surgery actually went really well. But 2 days later, I was back in the hospital with fever, and what had happened is my colon had come apart in my body where they had put it back together. And for 2 days, they didn't figure it out until I was dying, and then they had to open me up, kind of exploratory surgery, and I was just full of nasty. And as a result of that surgery and of that situation, as soon as they opened me up, I popped. Like, I remember the residents said, I popped.
Wow.
And then I instantly swole, and they couldn't even put me back together. So I was like Humpty Dumpty with all exposed everything. And I'm like awake looking at, like, this isn't supposed to, like a horror movie. Mm-hmm. And had to like be like that for months and months and months until all the drains sucking all the stuff out of my body, like everything was sort of back to kind of normal to where I could get at least closed. And then I had a bag, like I was like that whole thing. And I didn't meditate. Like I was so overwhelmed that like I couldn't even meditate. I couldn't even do it.
Couldn't get yourself to do it.
I forgot it. Weirdly, I forgot that I had this everyday meditation practice. Or it's like, oh, it's not going to help. This is too much of a big deal or something. It was so imminent death, sort of related that I don't know why. I mean, I'm baffled by it. But I remember sitting on this couch right behind me, and that spot right there, like that's my spot. I just sat right there and like laid back when I could barely move. And I just remember saying to myself, I haven't meditated in like 8 months. And it was a daily practice. And like everything was going bad. Like everything was going bad. My attitude wasn't great. I was like tired of being next to death. And I was like, and also dealing with the like, well, just one more thing. Like, haven't I had enough? Bad things happen. Like, right? Like that whole thing. And I was just like, I just dropped into meditation, and it was terrible. Like I couldn't really get to the place I used to go, but then I started putting my meditation practice back in, and everything got better.
Wow.
My attitude, my outlook, and then as following that, my healing and recovery. And then I started with chemo, and then like meditation was very beneficial through chemo. And then, so it's back in my life today. And that is, it's been my saving grace for sure.
Wow, man. How about yoga? What was it like getting back on your yoga mat after
it was
going
tough.
through it? Yeah, I bet.
It was tough because, well, it was like one thing then the other. I don't want to belabor the point, but like I was so tight in my core so I was open from sternum to pelvis.
Yeah.
When they put me back together, right? Put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Because I wasn't comfortable practicing when I was all loose, because I was like, this is not going to be good for me. As a matter of fact, I was advised not to, medically speaking. But then I got to the point where like I could, and I was all put back together, but the scar just contracts, and especially because I wasn't able to move my body. So even standing upright almost felt like it was ripping my abdominal wall.
Yeah.
And then right when I got to the point where I could start to practice again, like just little movements on the mat at home, like I'm not going to the studio yet. And I was like, okay. And then I had to get a surgery on this like eruption of this weird fluid around my liver that exploded out of my side. So I'm like leaking. This is crazy. I mean, it's a little graphic, but like I'm leaking some anomalous fluid that even the folks at Mayo Clinic can't say exactly what it is or why it happened. But I have all this fluid around my liver, and it blew out my side, and I'm leaking weird pus-like. Thank God it wasn't stinky like you see on Dr. Pimple Popper or anything, but it's just leaking, and I'm like, I can't practice because if I bend over, like all this stuff is like leaking out of my body. So I had to like and then finally after that, finally healed, I started practicing again, and it has been slow going. My endurance level isn't quite back yet. I lost 50 pounds in that when I couldn't move. 40 of the 50 pounds I lost was muscle. And then I put 40 of the 50 pounds back on, and maybe 15 of it's muscle. So I got, because my doctor, because to have the surgery that I needed, they're like, you need to gain weight, but I couldn't really exercise. And then so they were like, eat cake and ice cream. And there's something about eating cake and ice cream that makes you want to eat more cake and ice cream.
Yeah, there is. That's sugar, man.
Yeah, sugar is the most addictive substance on the planet. And so I'm right now, like in this conversation, I'm finally getting back to like, okay, I can move. Well, I did, when I started working out again, I ripped a hernia in my abdominal wall. So I still have to be careful. I have to go get one more surgery to repair that and then heal from that. And then maybe I can go full bore again. So it's little by little, but I feel good now for the first time in a long time.
Well, and I think getting back into the activities that you love and that you know are important, the big part of that is how you're feeling going into it, but then also like you've spoken to this whole entire podcast episode about the mental aspect of it and how important that is. What do you say to yourself? And, for the listeners out there who've fallen out of their yoga practice or fallen out of the things that they love, that they want to get back into it, but they're kind of stuck. What do you say to yourself when you just really don't want to do it mentally, but you know that it's going to be good for you to get yourself doing it again?
And it's tough because it's funny because I know exactly what I say to myself, but I also want to be clear about it and say that I said the same thing to myself before and still didn't do it. Right. And that's just like, I know I just need to, I know I just need to do. It's all you can set all the intentions you want. It's in the doing. It's in the action that creates results. And it just took finally saying, well, GD, man, I got to actually do it. I can't just say it anymore. I have to go do. And then it's like, it finally felt better. Like, okay, I did it. And now how am I feeling better? Okay, now do it again and again. And then you can get back into the routine or habit of being good to yourself. And I think a lot of times, and this is definitely happened for me, and I think it's very real, and a lot of people that I coach some executives on mindfulness, not for the last year and a half, but I'm getting back into it now.
Great.
And it's that sort of same old thing is like, you have to just understand that you have to actually do the thing, right? Do the thing, and then what you want to have happen will happen. And, know what you want to have happen and be for it, as as we say, right? And that whole process of finally listening to the sort of knowing that I had, that like I actually have to do it, having the feeling of like, okay, I do feel better. And then once you get on that train, you're back in it. But so for people that are struggling, like if I'm talking to them, right, I'm like, you have to know that you're good enough, you're worth it. Because this was me, like, I'm like, why all these bad things have happened to me, so maybe I don't deserve to feel good. Maybe I'm paying some karmic debt from the past. Like, yeah, bullshit. You're worth it. You're worth the time. You're worth the effort. And so the way to say to yourself that you're worth it is in the doing. And so when you do that, also you cut out the negative self-talk, right? Because then you actually feel proud of yourself for just stupid thing like walking out of the door. Like, even if it's just, I'm going to go to the gym, just walk out the door. And now you're out the door. Oh, I got to get in the car now. And now I'm going to the gym, right? So just start with the littlest thing. Just go out the door with your car keys. Oh, here I am. Might as well get in the car. Oh, might as well go to the gym. And then you work out and you do whatever it is that you can do. And then you come back and you're like, I feel better. And then that's the cycle you want to get on, because once you start feeling good, you're going to feel good.
That's right. It doesn't matter what you tell yourself. You got to get out there and do the damn thing.
Right?
Dang, man. I know you're raising money now for cancer. Mm-hmm. And in the post that I saw that you put up, you talked a little bit about what's called the PACT Act, and it talks a lot about toxic exposure and how that leads to cancer. Can you talk more about that and why you're passionate about raising money for and bringing awareness to that whole situation?
Absolutely. So I'm raising money actually for breast cancer, right? So again, women are my favorite version of the species. I have 3 daughters, an amazing wife, a granddaughter. And so I am blessed to have amazing women in my life. And I know men also get breast cancer, but at a much lesser degree. And all reproductive cancers. So the PACT Act is basically some legislation. It's a promise to keep. It's basically keeping America's promise to people who've been victims of toxic exposure from combat. Like even back to Agent Orange in Vietnam. Like the brutal reality about combat is, they're not really being great stewards of the environment during combat. Like, it is what it is, right? The burn pits, there's depleted uranium shells, there's all, and plus I'm in Iraq. Like, who knows what else is there from their time operating in these bases that we've taken over. And so the PACT Act basically, to boil it down really simply, basically states that if you've been in any of these certain combat zones, so talking about Iraq, Afghanistan, a bunch of other, like going back in time to Korea, right? That if you have any of these lists of cancers, and it's an extensive list, like any GI cancer, any reproductive cancer, if you have any of those cancers and have served in any of those list of places, then the government automatically presumes that cancer is directly related to your service. And which, I was very careful about what I put into my body. and I was taking good care of myself, and I'm physically fit, and like all the things. And to get a cancer diagnosis, I was kind of blown away. And so were my doctors. And so they even pointed to the fact that it might be toxic exposure. And then the PACT Act happened after my diagnosis sort of came into law. And so for me, I want people, like, if you're someone who has served overseas in a combat environment, or feel like you've been in an environment where you were exposed to toxins, go get screened, like get checked out, because those, known carcinogens that are out there, and the things that we don't know are carcinogens yet, especially being in the military and all of the things that they burn in the burn pits and everything else, like, you gotta go get looked at and go get checked, because you can catch something early and then not have to deal with what I went through at stage 3. Thankfully, I caught it before stage 4. But then, God, and hopefully if they have a surgery to make it go away, or take the cancer out, they don't have the complications that I had. But like, go get checked out so you can actually just see what you're working with. Get a chest x-ray, get your blood work. If you've been a veteran, like, go to the VA. If you don't have healthcare right now, if there's somebody out there listening who has served and doesn't have healthcare, you can get, through the PACT Act, free lifetime VA healthcare benefits. So you'll have a primary care doctor, and you'll be covered for surgeries and everything else. Like, go get checked out, because this is like historic level of opportunity for veterans to be able to get taken care of for things that they didn't even know were killing them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, knowing that all reproductive cancers are covered, and breast cancer being one of them, all forms of breast cancer. Yeah, I encourage everybody, if they're listening, go to my Instagram, at Dan Nevins, DANNEVINS. There's a link in my bio to donate. And my goal is just $5,000 for the American Cancer Society, all geared towards breast cancer research. I'm just a dude and who wants to help women, help all people, really. But I'm passionate about helping our stronger sex be as healthy as possible.
Yeah, dang right, Dan. Oh, man. This has been the greatest hour and 20 minutes I've had in a long time, buddy.
Thanks,
I
brother.
appreciate that you've taken the time to be a part of this show.
Heck yeah,
and
man.
share yourself again. Play Hard and Love Big Radio is dedicated to bringing the inspirational peoples and stories so that people go out and live their most purposeful and passionate life. And I couldn't think of any better person to come on to our show and to share. You've been incredible and inspirational, and I always learn something new from you, and I'm rejuvenated and reinvigorated to go out and to live my life better because you are my friend. So thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Y'all out there that are listening, thank you for sharing our show. We've been getting better numbers, and it's really neat. And I know that's because you guys are sharing it with the people that you think can benefit. So share this with people that are vets that are out there, so that they can get a better understanding of the PACT Act, so they can get a better understanding of how yoga can make a difference. Yoga and meditation can make a difference for them and their lives. And come join us sometime at Spotted Dog Yoga and Sup here in Folsom. We are available in person and also online nowadays. So check us out at spotteddogyoga.com. Any final parting words from you there, Dan?
Yeah, so understanding that a lot of your listeners might already be a yoga type of person, invite a veteran to yoga. You just might save their life.
Invite a veteran to yoga. You might just save their life. Dang right, Dan Nevins. All right, my man. Thank you, everyone, for listening in, and have a great rest of your day. Peace out.
Boom, boom.
Boom, boom.